coming from ahead of you is more voices, movement, grinding, and even maybe fire or some sort of a roaring kind of sound. And then it's a lot of, it sounds like construction or some sort of work going on. And that's coming from down here. But over here is where the tinking is coming from, and that's kind of louder. Tink, 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 tink. It sounds like...
People are probably mining.
Yeah, they're getting material for those dudes down there. Do we want to go toward them or off this direction?
Well, I don't know if they're bad or not, so...
That's the problem. Send the rogue.
Dragons started in the 70s. A guy named Gary Gygax invented it. He and his friends who used to play a game that he invented on paper and pencil and using dice. It's a fantasy game that involves one person called the Dungeon Master who invents some sort of a dungeon. It could be underground, a labyrinth, or it could be in a forest, it could be in an ice cavern, it could be anywhere the Dungeon Master decides he wants to build his dungeon. And then he has several players, usually 3, 4, or 5 players, sit around the table and they have to pretend to go into the dungeon and act out what would happen if they were put into that situation. So if they come across a door and it's locked, do they break it down? Do they set it on fire? Do they pick the lock? And all of those decisions are made by the player, and you use dice to figure out whether or not they're successful at doing whatever decision that they try to do. And so that's the game that they invented, and he decided to put it into book format, all the rules that he came up with, and it was called Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s. I started playing when I was about 10 years old, and kind of took a break during high school and college, and then got back into it about 23 years ago, and have been playing the same game ever since with the same group of people, still trying to go through different dungeons that I invent on about a monthly basis. Okay, so you see that the spider has jumped onto Donk, and you're now going to try to leap onto the back of the spider. Drider.
Yes.
Drider.
Yes.
Okay, so just do a dex check. So for whatever your dexterity is above 10, you get 1 point. What's your dex?
14.
Okay, so you get a +4. Roll 20-sided +4.
That puts it at 17.
Alright, you successfully have jumped onto the back of the Drider.
Sweet.
And what do you do when you get there? That's your move action. What are you going to do for your attack actions?
Oh, I'm going to do my backstab.
The backstab was
With
perfect.
My bleeder.
It means having a fun time, and a lot of times it's just a bunch of friends sitting around a table laughing and coming up with crazy stories, and some of the situations that you get into are exciting. Sometimes they're sad, sometimes they are like victorious. You have these real feelings of that you accomplished a mission, or maybe you had a defeat, or you had a setback, or all of the things that you can imagine that you might go through in exploring through a dungeon. Because you're kind of pretending to go through it, it's like any board game. It has the exciting parts, and you're happy when you do good, and if you have a bad day, then you're not as happy. And all of those things that you go through are very exhilarating sometimes, and hilarious. And it means having a good time and hanging out with your friends, really. An argument that goes back, you can tell, a long time. For however long they were in prison there, they're bringing up old things about the whole purpose of it. He says, but your spells caused the death of my wife. And they said, that wasn't our spells, that was our... And so it sounds like this whole thing is a misunderstanding between whether the spells that they were trying and learning to help things were actually the cause of his wife's death. And he assumed that it was. And they're saying that they had simply accidentally brought in the Driders, and the Driders had killed his wife, but they are now only people that they are working with as a self-defense to try to keep from, So they're basically saying that they did all they could to try to make whatever alliances they could to try to keep any kind of, they needed food, they wanted some sort of a way to protect themselves. And so I've played as a character, but mostly I've been the dungeon master, which is the person who invents the dungeon and kind of creates the world that the players go through. And that role as the dungeon master is basically to make the night fun. I've played in some games where the dungeon master was just trying to destroy the other players as a kind of a battle between players and the world builder, and that's not, I don't think that's the way you're supposed to play the game. You're supposed to play it as a dungeon master to make it challenging and difficult, but not impossible. It'd be like if I were to invent a crossword puzzle and nobody could solve it, that's probably not that much fun. But if I made one that's challenging, then it's a lot more interesting and people have a good time trying to solve it. That's what Dungeons & Dragons is, and the role of the Dungeon Master is to come up with a challenging yet exciting world that the players have to solve and try to find their way through and win.
Like a bird on a tree, I'm just sitting here. I got time, it's clear to see. From up here, the world seems small. We can sit together. It's so beautiful, you and me. We meant to be in the great outdoors, forever free. Sometimes you need to go and take a step back to see the truth around you from a distance.
There's certain tools that you have to have, pencils and paper, to keep track of, the name of your character, how strong they are. Are they a wizard? Are they a warrior? Are they a rogue? Are they a healer? What kind of weapon are they using? What kind of magical spells do they have? What kind of special abilities have they learned? And so you got to have the paper and the pencils, which you could just use basic binder paper and pencils. And then you need the dice. The dice are a big part of the game because rather than just having one person decide all of the answers to whether or not the door can be opened or the dragon gets destroyed or the princess gets saved, you use dice as a way to have a bit of element of luck and randomness come into the game. And so you got to have dice to play with. Now, I played the game with three-dimensional tiles and dungeonscapes and all kinds of landscapes and the little miniature figures that you can purchase. They're not necessary because when I first started playing, we just used a piece of graph paper to keep track of the map of the dungeon, and then everything was just a theater of the mind, is what they call, where you're just imagining what's happening rather than actually seeing little board figures moving across a board. But as I've grown into the game and I've learned how to build these tiles, and there's all kinds of YouTube videos out in the world to show how to build these. I've really gotten into doing that. So all of these things are made out of styrofoam or clay or hot glue and some lots of different paint and all kinds of different tools that I use to build these tiles and landscapes are something that just enhances the game and makes it a lot more interesting to play. So even though he kind of pointed to, you're still struggling like, I don't know what you're looking at. It's too dark and too far away and not enough light. Like I said, there's 3 lanterns. And this thing is really good at hiding in shadows, but it's moving towards that dwarf up there.
I start playing charades. I'm like on the ground.
Do you have a ranged weapon?
I can throw my spear, or I can throw a pink.
I wouldn't throw your spear because then
You are a half-elven archer or a goblin druid or whatever character you decide to make up. But then once you kind of get into that character, you have to try to pretend to behave the way you think they would behave in whatever situation. So as you're crossing the bone bridge and you see an ogre on the other side with a club with spikes in it, are you going to be valiant and run forward and try to attack, or are you going to try to be smart and lure him onto the bridge and then maybe knock him off, or are you going to try to run and hide because you think he's too powerful? So kind of having the imagination to try to come up with creative ways to make the game more interesting is really the main thing that you need to have as a requirement to play the game. You got to have the willingness to have fun and probably a few hours to spare. So it does take, one night could take 4, 5, 6, up to 10 hours I've played it in some cases. So it's not a fast game. It's not over in an hour. It'll take you some time to play, but you're having a good time and laughing with your friends. And it's multiple. It's not just like one. It's like you hear it happen and then you hear it happen. All right. So it's a long tunnel. You see more corpses that have also been cleaned by the carrion crawler. You go about a good 2 or 3 minutes of walking and walking and walking, and then the passageway comes to an intersection. It goes all 4 directions: north, south, east, west. And coming from the left, going and then making a turn, going away from you, is a little minecart. One of the most memorable adventures that I was in, I was the dungeon master, and I had it wasn't a dungeon like this, it was a city adventure, and there was a group of 5 of my friends who were going to try to do some exploration in this one area of the city, but before they got in, they had to go through the guards at the front wall. That was the door where the gate was closed, and I had given them many warnings about this city, telling them that it was very anti-magic, it was very anti-adventurers. They didn't want mercenaries coming to their town to try to generate some sort of a disturbance of magic and fighting in battles and bar brawls. So they were very tight and conservative, and we didn't want any troublemakers in this city. And I described that to them very clearly, many times, and they knew this going in. So as their characters walked up to the front gate and they were interviewed by the front guard, he asked them who they were and what their business was. And without any hesitation, the leader of the group, one of my best friends, Aaron, said, "We are adventurers," shouted out at the top of his lung. "We're adventurers. We are the Naturals," that's the name of the group. We're adventurers. And that was it. From that point on, the night that I had planned for them completely changed from them exploring through a city and trying to come find some clues for a mystery that they were solving. But it became them getting arrested and all of their possessions taken and put into a jail where they had to escape, and they had none of their equipment, none of the magic items, none of their armor or their swords or anything, because it was stripped of them because this one decision he had made changed. Actually, it didn't just change that night, it changed the next 2 or 3 nights that we played. This was a huge adventure, and all it became was them going through a prison system, going to court. It was actually a court hearing, and where they were found guilty, and then in the middle of it all, during the sentencing, they decided to try to break free, but they had nothing. They had no weapons, they had no gear, they had no armor, and so it was a fist fight for them to try to get out of the city and find their possessions and then just get away. And at the very end, one of their characters completely died, and couldn't be revived. And one of them had been holding and keeping in secret a wish ring, and even the rest of the players didn't know he had it. And after the character died, he decided to pull out his wish ring, put it on, and wish that the whole adventure had never happened. So it completely wiped out all 3 days of us playing the game, and it took it right back to them walking up to the city to begin with, and then they decided to turn around and just leave. So they never even went to it. It never happened.